I brought a series of stories today, starting with a crowd pleaser, Apple, who now it seems is officially actually creating their own search engine. And there's been a couple of different reports on this, actually sort of tracing back to August. But what we all of us knew is 2 years ago, Apple actually stole the head of search from Google. So it's not like, people have been suspecting this move for a while. But some recent things have happened that make it quite clear what's happening. So, Financial Times report says that there's growing evidence of Apple's efforts to develop their own search engine. So, Apple is ramping up efforts to develop its own search engine, according to a Financial Times report published this Wednesday, as U.S. antitrust authorities threaten a lucrative deal that sets Google's search engine as the default option on iPhones and Samsung phones. Lots of interesting stuff in this. First of all, for a long time we've talked about Google's monopoly on search. So some of us are old enough to remember there was something called Yahoo, there was something called Bing. And I know last time we talked about the power of when a company becomes a verb. So we talked about cahooting, and Googling is one of the most powerful things out there, like Skyping, or I'm Airbnb-ing it. Both of all, there's a business move here that's interesting from Apple, but I think there's also something around privacy. The report cites that a lot of people are beginning to feel uncomfortable with the amount of data that Google has about us and our behavior. And even though Cook has come out multiple times saying I'm super dedicated to human rights, I've even come out against the FBI, using our services to track down terrorists and stuff like that. A couple of scandals make me nervous about Google's use of data as well. Remember in 2018 where it came out that if you're using Google Maps and even you say, no, thank you, don't track my behavior. I don't want you to know that I'm going to my neighbor to have an affair. You turn that shit off, they're still tracking in incognito mode where you're going. So I think there's been a couple of moves like that. Some people have argued even Google Street View and Google Earth. Is that really ethical? Who gave you permission to map the entire universe? The rest of us can't just put up cameras and satellites everywhere. So to me, I think that the people that want to have a choice, it's something that's great for them. But I think also from Apple, some people will argue, isn't Google so big? Can you make a search engine that can rival it? It's not something you build. I mean, Google spent over 20 years building a good search engine. There's a lot of indexing. There's a lot of relevance algorithms. It's not something you just do overnight. But I do see the immediate distribution channel that Apple has, right? You put it into your own devices automatically from the beginning, then you've already distributed it through that entire value chain. So I think they have that channel there, and they've done sort of small things that indicate that they are going that way. So if y'all have updated your phone to the newest system, I think it's iOS 14, then what you see is actually when you swipe right, and you do a search, they've stopped sort of default going to the Google page, but they link more directly to websites. So they are already testing some of these things. And all of us know that, there's a tremendous amount of value in, knowing, what are people searching for? Where are they going? And I definitely think that we should view them as a serious contender. I have no way of knowing whether their privacy settings is something that we'd be more happy with than what's happening at Google, but it definitely is coming. And I think from an EU perspective, at least the fact that there's competition will make a lot of people and a lot of regulators very happy.
And maybe Apple is the only one who's actually able to pull that off, to move Google out of the first place and stop this worldwide ruling of search engine Google.
Yeah, I think they're the only serious contender. And then I wonder how they're going to integrate their data across some of their services. Because I think to me what's interesting about Google is that they own so many companies and all of it's interconnected. How you spend your money, what you're searching for and where you're going and your recommendations. So they've built up this entire universe. So what will Apple be able to do if they also begin to, by default, integrate a lot of the apps as their own apps, and buy a lot of like the popular apps as their own apps? Like they could also make their own mapping services and things like that, right?
Do you think that's an indicator that Apple could eventually become an advertising company, since this is a major part of what Google's doing?
I think it's a possibility, but I also think like let's see Google move more into hardware like they've done also with like the Google Home. So like my entire home is wired with Google Home. So sometimes you also need those devices to gather the data, so the hardware to make some of the software moves interesting. And the move with putting the Google Home into the house was a way for them to sort of extend their life into other devices that were owned by them into our lives. And so in Denmark, there's this majorly popular radio program that airs every Saturday. And it's kind of like one of those shows where you can ask a question. So viewers will write in with a dilemma, and then there's always an expert panel of like politicians and actors, and they answer those questions. And one that came in a couple of weeks ago was actually a guy who describes himself as pretty well-rounded, not like a conspiracy theorist and not like a technologist. He views himself as in the middle. And he asks, is it okay for me if I'm visiting a friend to ask them to plug out all of their Google Home devices while I'm in their house? Because I don't appreciate that they are likely recording like all of our conversations, because it's a breach of like my privacy and I feel, uncertain about it. Which I'm not sure I would like place him on that end of the spectrum. I mean, we have seen, there was a big scandal also with the Google Homes related to people that have been hired to transcribe your conversations. So I mean, there's substantial evidence that is happening. I mean, I don't think you as an individual should be going to the lengths. What I can say is that I have a summer house that I rent out sometimes. And every time I rent out the summer house, all the guests will have unplugged every single Google Home in every room.
Wow.
I don't know if they're thinking that like I don't have anything better to do, if it's like they think that I'm listening or if they think it's like Google listening. But that's probably on the extreme end. I mean, I would also say then you need to unplug your television. It's been pretty well-known fact for a while that a smart TV was one of the first devices that entered your home that actually knows a considerable amount of information about you, especially with sound, but also like those that have the camera and that
Yeah,
could
there was a
record.
big scandal with Samsung.
Exactly,
And the
with the
webcam.
Samsung TVs. So I think, so it goes back to there is a tremendous value, whether on the legal or non-legal side right now, to have hardware devices in people's home. And I think that it's not like people are going to stop using Google apps on their Apple devices, but I think it makes sense for Apple to go in this direction.
But that's probably like we're having some problems with security due to the fact that technology is moving faster than our capability to account for the security of this technology. And thanks to Google's monopoly, they've been able to put tremendous amount of money to developing these new technologies. So if Apple takes a big cut of their paycheck, what will happen then? Will innovation go down thanks to Google going down? Or it will just skyrocket because now Google has a real potential competitor out there?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we've always seen competition is healthy and competition will grow innovation. So I'm excited that the giants are going to go up against each other in this space. And I think generally, just a side note, I'm more worried about the Zac Efron fans out there coming after me on social media that I'm worried about Google misusing my data, not because it's not happening, but because it's still not the power it would take to trace me as an individual, like if just through my Google Home, if it actually listened to me. We're not, those of us that know something about natural language processing and machine learning know that it's still aggregated data. So I'm more worried about that. And actually in Denmark, it's been a long known fact that there are certain things you cannot say in public if you wanted to not be hated on social media. One of them has always been you cannot say that you hate animals. I will put it out there. I hate animals. We'll see what happens. And we'll now officially add to the list, you cannot hate on Zac Efron.